Hi, this is Don McAllister and welcome to another edition of Screencasts Online. Following a recent trip, I mentioned in the newsletter that it might be useful for me to write up some of my experiences and recommendations for travelling with your tech. Well, I've gone one step further and created this tutorial. Once you step out of the comfort and security of your business or home with your Mac, iPad or iPhone, there are a whole host of considerations you need to be aware of. So this week I'll be looking at hardening the security of your Mac via some recommended configuration changes, as well as some additional software and devices you might want to consider. I'll cover travelling with your iPad and iPhone in a future show, so let's start by taking a look at preparing to travel with your Mac.